Hello everyone. Today we're back with the weekly videos, right? On YouTube, analyzing opportunities, giving you a market update in a more complete way, right? In both of these time frames, both in the higher time frame, the HTF, and also in the lower time frame, the LTF, right? So today what we're going to be doing is starting off here with Ethereum, right? Now what we have here is an interesting movement, okay? So what's actually happening here? Ethereum, it made, right? Let's take a closer look at this situation and see exactly what is going on because it's quite intriguing, honestly. An impulse movement, but it's leaving liquidity at the bottom, right? In other words, we have some possibilities here that the price might try to do, which is to trick, right? Retail into buying early before it actually makes, right? The movement. What do I see here? First of all, the price is generating, right? Internal liquidity within this range that was created. Okay? So could I take a buy in this region? I could. But there's something very interesting I have to notice here, which is this. The price generated a lot of liquidity in these bottom regions. Okay? In other words, it equalized the bottom, right? It left, right? Some interesting liquidity here because the price broke, but it didn't sweep previous liquidity. Okay, so I have to be aware of this pullback movement for that exact reason. Okay, this first demand zone here might fail so that the second zone works. Okay, because there's plenty of liquidity below these bottoms here, so it's something important that I have to be observing. Okay, but just in case, if you want to set up a slightly higher risk position, you can set up a position with RR here with a tighter stop, okay, on Ethereum. But this position here would be more interesting, okay? This position here would be more interesting because it would already have, right, a higher level of liquidation as soon as the position is activated, okay, parallel to that, right? We have liquidity further down, but it's quite far from the current price, okay? So we have to be watching the movements. In the case of the short, what can I see? That the price did sweep some very interesting liquidity here. However, for me to be taking a short here, I need the price to align, right? In other words, I need to see the market breaking a structure that is, let's say, true to the downside. What would a true structure be? It would be a strong bottom, right? A bottom that swept liquidity and broke structure. At the moment, I don't have this bottom formed yet, okay? So I could look, for a high time frame point of interest to look for short positions, but I see it's quite far away, right? So on Ethereum, for now, I would just observe and I wouldn't set up a short position for the time being, okay? Unless the market forms some interesting structure for me to be creating this position, right? At the moment, I don't see anything very interesting, right? I really see an accumulation here to generate liquidity, and that's what would validate this setup, okay? It's this liquidity generation here that would validate the possibility of taking this setup, but it's a high risk setup, considering that below the point of interest, there's liquidity too, right? So I have to be watching that on Ethereum. On Bitcoin, it's like this. The charts for both are very similar looking at the moment, right? But on Bitcoin, on the 12-hour chart, I was able to identify a balanced price range here that's interesting. It could be traded considering the same liquidity that's being formed, at the base of these bottoms. Even though it's not a liquidity I like to trade, I like to trade liquidity where the price has broken structure without sweeping, previous liquidity. That's the kind of liquidity I really like to be trading. This liquidity here, I usually don't like very much, okay? And Bitcoin is the same, but on Bitcoin, this bottom liquidity is even clearer, see? So I prefer, okay, on Bitcoin as well, to set up a position here with a much higher take profit, okay, than setting up a position here. But if I were to set up a position here, it would be like this. It would be a position with a tight stop loss, okay? If I opened a position at 72,400, it would be with a tight stop loss. I would choose to open a position at 69,200, okay? Or, if the market moves with more strength, with more intent, I'd look for this point of interest at 67,100, okay, which is also interesting. Now looking, I've even done a slightly more detailed analysis, shared it in the community, which would be Look at this point of interest. This point of interest is quite interesting, okay? Because of this internal liquidity here from the macro range. But let's take Bitcoin here on the 12-hour chart, just so I can show you the following, right? The possibility of the short, right? Bitcoin, it hasn't swept the liquidity that Ethereum swept yet, okay? It hasn't done that sweep. In other words, we still have liquidity at the top. The price will probably make a pullback move and come looking for this liquidity. And a little further up, we have an internal range liquidity from the macro range, you know, from the weekly, which is interesting. It makes an interesting confluence here with the little channel. So I'd look at this order block, okay? It's in the 81,800 to 84,600 range. So this would be a very interesting supply for us to set up short positions, okay? Right now, I wouldn't set up shorts on Bitcoin unless I had a very interesting alignment here on the lower time frame, okay? That really nice little change of character, because this region of 82, if I'm not mistaken, it confluences with the gap on the CME, which is in the region of between 79 and 84. It's the same region, right? Let's say it's the same region between 80 and 84. It's a very interesting region to look for shorts, okay? Bitcoin, it'll close this gap sooner or later, so this could be the time, right? Even though the price is rising slowly, it could be the time. I think the market should be making a more interesting impulse, okay? So for me to short Bitcoin, I'll wait for an alignment, okay? I haven't seen that interesting alignment yet. Maybe this could happen. Since liquidity is building up on the top two, the price, maybe it could try to do the following. Come sweep this liquidity. Once it's swept, it makes an interesting alignment, which would be this change of character. Look. Then we could set up a sell position, okay? Before that, I don't think it's interesting to sell Bitcoin either, okay? I think it's better to just watch, especially since it's accumulating and getting very slow now, okay? There's an interesting altcoin, which is DOT. DOT is as follows, right? It was in an accumulation phase and it did the manipulation, right? I marked it in red and it's about to do the distribution now, okay? And we have an interesting structure that was formed, which is the structure I usually trade, and I even teach my students to trade it. The price swept liquidity and it broke structure, okay? A break of structure isn't the body, it's the wick. In other words, the price swept liquidity and broke structure. This top is a strong top. It's a top where if the price breaks it, it could be making a true change of character, okay? Parallel to this, we've already had a bottom form, okay? If I go down the time frame, I'll see that this is clearly a bottom, meaning this is internal liquidity, okay? And I have this interesting POI here at 1.19, okay? So I'd set up a long position here on DOT, okay? It would be very interesting to take this position. I'll wait for this opportunity, okay? I can put my stop loss either below the POI or at the actual low, right? Making a slightly larger take profit expansion here, okay? So it would be a very interesting setup, right? I'll even be sharing the exact details in the VIP community, but I'll leave it here for you in advance in the video, okay? It's a potentially very interesting setup, okay? Let's look at VET. I shared a VET position with the VIP community, right? We bought at 69, 67, between 69 and 67. It made an interesting move. I'll be updating it there later. Let's check NEAR, man. NEAR hit an interesting supply zone here. The price felt it, right? But for NEAR, I'd still look for a long position after, right? The price sweeps all this liquidity accumulation generated here. I'd keep looking at this region between 126, 128, even 125 here, okay? I won't make any short decisions here yet, but if there's some alignment on the 15-minute chart, some interesting change of character, I'll update you, okay? But I'll be monitoring it as well. There was another interesting altcoin I analyzed, which was XLM, okay? XLM, man. I missed this opportunity because I forgot to share it with the community. But, you know, we had a liquidity sweep. Super interesting here, okay? It swept super interesting liquidity and did the mitigation, right? Of the point of interest. What am I going to wait for here? I'll wait for the price to make this break, okay? Once it breaks, I'll look for this movement right here. See? Okay, I'll look for a buy here in this region. Okay, I'll just wait for this break here because it's an interesting break. This break has to happen, okay? It needs this change of character here for the setup to be interesting. Guys, the video is already 10 minutes long now, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If you have any questions, you can message me on Telegram, okay? I'll be updating there. We're going back to weekly videos, okay? Every week, sharing market updates and opportunities. Join the community, right? And share the video with everyone, with your friends, to help more people and also grow the community's reach. And that's it. Go with God. God bless each and every one of you. We're in this together.